Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 6 articles for today's analysis. We have 4 columns that require a comprehensive discussion as they are important both for prelims and mains, and 2 small articles relevant for the prelims exam. So let's cover these topics in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the paper again. If you guys are liking our initiative, do support us with your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start, I have a very important announcement. If you wish to enroll for the 2026 Liberty Batch, where India's top English medium educators will be taking live classes, and along with attending live classes, you will get access to prelims and mains test series with doubt resolution and one-on-one mentorship. So this program shall be available at just $24,999, and you would get an added 9-month extension, a free extension on your subscription. But this offer is limited. It ends tomorrow because from tomorrow onwards, the prices are going to increase. So if you're interested and if you want to enroll for a free counseling session, please fill the Google form, which is provided in the link in the video description below. So share your details and our team will get in touch with you. So with this, let's get started with the first article from page number 1 and a related article on page number 10. There has been a big breakthrough in India-China tensions. Yesterday, the Ministry of External Affairs has announced that India-China have agreed on an arrangement to restore the patrolling at the flashpoints in Ladakh. Now, this is the first time since 2020, since the Ladakh clashes began between India and China, that both sides have worked out an arrangement to bring back normalcy, at least with regard to patrolling. So this big announcement has been made by India, that too at a crucial time, because today Prime Minister Modi will be traveling to Russia to attend the BRICS summit. The BRICS summit will bring together India and China, and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will be participating as well. So in the run-up to BRICS summit, both India and China have managed to achieve a very big breakthrough that helps in reducing tensions in Ladakh and brings back a sense of normalcy and restores status quo, at least as far as 2020 situation was concerned. So this creates an opportunity for both the leaders to interact with each other and take forward the relationship across various sectors. So PM Modi and Xi Jinping are expected to meet at the upcoming BRICS summit, and right before that, India has announced the restoration of normalcy, at least with regard to patrolling. Now, this is a topic that we need to understand in slight detail, because the topic can be very important for a mains question under GS paper 2. So let's look at the background. Let's go a little beyond the article. Understand what clashes we had in Ladakh in 2020, how the tensions had built up, and what were the developments of the last 4 years. And then we can analyze the significance of these recent developments. In 2020, China carried out a major escalation against India by carrying out multiple incursions in the Ladakh sector. When the whole world was combating the COVID-19 pandemic, China shook India and surprised India by deliberately pushing multiple incursions. Not just in Ladakh, even in Sikkim towards the Nathula Pass, incursions were carried out by the Chinese PLA, where they crossed across the line of actual control into Indian territory. And the Chinese troops even tried to disrupt the regular patrolling by Indian troops. So China even amassed more troops and equipment, and it brought in reinforcements and carried out a major military mobilization. So this was immediately countered by India. India carried out a counter mobilization in order to ward off the Chinese threat. And as a result, the tension started emerging between the two sides. A military standoff had essentially begun where both the troops were facing off each other and both sides were amassing thousands of troops with advanced and heavy military equipment. And it appeared that both countries were about to get involved in a conflict. In June 2020, these tensions led to a tragic event at Galwan River Valley. At the Galwan flashpoint, there were clashes between Indian and Chinese troops, as a result of which 20 Indian soldiers were martyred, along with a number of PLA soldiers. Now, this was the biggest escalation in India-China relationship since the 1962 war. Even though no firing was done by either of the side, because there are boundary agreements that prevent both the armies from opening fire or carrying heavy arms and weapons near the LAC. But still, the fist fight, the hand-to-hand fight which happened between Indian Army and the PLA, and the consequent death of several soldiers on both sides, it had a huge impact on the relationship and escalated the tensions. So first, let's look at the places where these incursions were carried out and why exactly was China putting this pressure on India. If you look at the map over here, you can observe the locations such as Penong So Lake. So both at the north and south bank of Penong So Lake, Chinese incursions were reported where the PLA were obstructing the regular access that Indian Army had. Then at Hot Springs area, a major incursion was carried out, including at the Galwan River Valley, which is right next to the line of actual control. This is where the clashes happened in 2020, where 20 Indian soldiers were martyred. Then you can also see Depsang Plains near Daulat Beg Oldie, very close to the Karakoram ranges in Ladakh, and to the south you can see Demchok over here. So these were the locations where the clashes occurred and where the standoff had taken place. Now, to understand why China was carrying out this escalation, experts have brought out various arguments. One possible reason could be India's growing closeness to United States, which was perceived by China as a strategic threat. In fact, over the last 10-15 years, China has opposed the strategic ties between India and US. China almost perceives India as an American ally, as US perceives a containment strategy to contain China in the Indo-Pacific. Even though India has made it clear that we follow independent foreign policy, China perceives that India is an American ally. As India joined groupings like the Quadrilateral and stepped up defense and security relations with US and the Quad members, Chinese aggression against India has naturally grown. So this could have been one of the possible reasons to put that pressure back on India. Or there are other reasons attributed as well. For example, the changes that India carried out to Jammu and Kashmir by revoking the special status under Article 370 in 2019. Because this was followed by the reorganization of the erstwhile state of J&K, and Ladakh was transformed into a union territory, thus bringing it directly under the administration of the center. Now, Ladakh is a major flashpoint as far as the India-China boundary dispute is concerned. This is where Aksai Chin is located, which is Indian territory, but under the illegal occupation of China. Since 1962, China has occupied Aksai Chin, and India claims the whole of Aksai Chin based on British-era boundaries. In fact, since 1950s, Aksai Chin has been a point of contention between India and China. And also look at the strategic value of these locations. Eventually, this connects with the Karakoram range, and it lies next to the strategic Siachen Glacier, which is disputed between India and Pakistan, and lies to the south of the Xinjiang province of China. And securing Xinjiang has always been a priority for China. In fact, since 1950s, one reason why China has prioritized Aksai Chin, and the reason why it went on to occupy Aksai Chin from India, was largely to connect Xinjiang with Tibet, as both were annexed territories where China was facing internal rebellions. Tibetan Buddhists rebelled against the Chinese annexation since 1950. The Uyghur Muslims of Xinjiang also rebelled against the Chinese annexation. So, from a security point of view, it was a priority for China to stabilize these frontier areas. And Aksai Chin offered a good connection between the two. China was building a strategic road. In fact, this road exists even today. It has been further expanded as well. The G219, one of the longest highways in the world, connecting Tibet with Xinjiang with Mongolia. So China kept its eyes on Aksai Chin because of its geostrategic location, through which it could build this strategic highway connecting Xinjiang with Tibet so that it could move the troops around. So since then, China has been very aggressive in this region, and it has not even hesitated to challenge India's position even at the LAC, which is a temporary de facto border. See, previously, especially in 1990s, both sides had worked out few boundary agreements to avoid such tensions and escalations. After the 1962 war, of course, tensions prevailed in the relationship, and this tense relationship continued until 1990s. For almost 3 decades, India-China had a very tense relationship. Every now and then, in 1960s, 1980s as well, we had seen few escalations happening. But following Rajiv Gandhi's visit in 1988 and PV Narasimha Rao's visit in 1990s, a new era was opened in India-China relations. Both sides, which were having common interests in 1990s, they started working together. Especially the Chinese economy had started growing rapidly. China had carried out economic reforms, opened up its economy, and was on the verge of becoming a global manufacturing hub. So it needed markets like India. It needed partners and like-minded countries like India, because both India and China were developing emerging economies. Similarly, India needed China as well. India had just gone through an economic crisis. India also initiated the LPG reforms, and we had opened up our economy. We needed goods from China, investments from China. We needed access to the Chinese market. So the growing economic and geopolitical developments brought the two countries closer. And in 1990s, we even worked out few boundary agreements in 1993 and 1996 to ensure that the boundary issue is isolated from the larger relationship. So that through these boundary agreements, stability can be maintained at the disputed border, and it can ensure that the larger relationship, especially the economic relationship and diplomatic relationship, can be protected. In fact, believe it or not, from 1990s to early 2000, India and China were even working together, helping each other at various multilateral platforms, be it at WTO or climate change negotiations, or even sometimes at United Nations. As like-minded developing nations, India and China would work together, collaborate together. So in 1993, we signed the Peace and Tranquility Agreement to maintain peace and tranquility along the line of actual control. In 1996, we signed a follow-up agreement, the Agreement on Confidence-Building Measures, to avoid any mistrust and miscommunication and build confidence in both sides. So these agreements placed a number of restrictions on the troops. For example, both Indian Army and PLA were restricted from carrying heavy weapons near the LAC. They have been prohibited from opening fire against each other. That's why whenever you read about India-China clashes or incursions, you read about fist fights and hand-to-hand fights, where both sides are pelting stones at each other, using wooden sticks and cricket bats or hockey sticks to beat up each other. It's as if two street gangs are fighting. It doesn't appear to be two professional armies engaged in a conflict. The reason why such hand-to-hand combat happens and both sides don't open fire is because both are prohibited from doing that. These agreements place a restriction. It prohibits Indian Army and PLA from carrying heavy weapons and opening fire against each other. So this avoids any unnecessary escalation, because both India and China have a differing perception of the LAC. So naturally, when you have a different perception of where the boundary is located, there will be incursions which will happen from both sides. And if you allow each incursion to escalate into a conflict, then there is no stability in the relationship at all. So to avoid that and avoid a minor conflict escalating into a bigger war, these agreements were put in place. Both sides were restricted with regard to their military exercises and their training programs. For example, they can't conduct military exercises very close to the LAC. and they have to turn the other side. They have to face inwards towards their own country while conducting a military exercise so that it doesn't send any wrong signal to the other side. So there are such restrictions, and more importantly, if at all an incursion happens and if at all an escalation occurs, these agreements provided for a standard protocol. A standard protocol through which both the sides can come to an agreement to resolve the tensions. It created an arrangement through which the military commanders from the local level to the senior brigadier level can talk to each other directly, engage in military level, commander level talks so that they can find solutions at the local level itself. This would allow the local escalation to be limited, and it would prevent that from escalating into a bigger conflict between the two countries. So such arrangement for talks was also created. A standard protocol was set up. And as per these agreements, whenever incursions would happen, the senior military commanders would engage with each other, talk to each other, and they would find a way out to disengage and de-escalate. So this has been a priority for India, especially as it seeks to avoid a full-fledged conflict with China. And for many years, China also was abiding by these agreements. In fact, in 2013, we even signed the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, the third boundary agreement, which stepped up border cooperation between India and China. But in recent years, China has gotten unnecessarily aggressive against India. The possible reason could be India's growing closeness with United States, and also the possible changes that India has made to the status of Ladakh. And Ladakh as a union territory coming directly under the administration of the center, which affects Chinese interests at Aksai Chin and along the disputed border. So over the last 4 years following these escalations, both sides have tried to engage in the standard process that has been created under these agreements. But India has accused China of violating these boundary agreements. Though India was insisting that we should go back to these standard protocols and allow the military commanders to resolve it, China was not willing to accept, and China was seen to be in breach of these agreed boundary deals. So India kept criticizing China that China is violating the boundary agreements and not allowing for the resolution of these tensions. Eventually, the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, requested his Chinese counterpart to reactivate the Special Representative Mechanism, or the SR mechanism, which was set up under the then Vajpayee administration in 2003 to find a political solution to the boundary dispute. Following the historic visit of Vajpayee to China in 2003, India-China had set up a SR mechanism, Special Representative Mechanism. Under this, both countries had appointed their special representatives. India chose the NSA, and China would be represented by the State Counselor, a senior leader from the Politburo of the Communist Party who handles foreign policy and security policy of China. So India's NSA and the State Counselor of China would meet and interact under the SR mechanism until 2009, and several rounds of boundary talks had been held by the then National Security Advisors. In fact, both sides were trying to find a political solution in order to resolve the boundary dispute permanently. And both sides had even made some progress before China made a U-turn and started targeting India from 2009-2010 as India got closer to the United States. So this mechanism had broken down from 2010. So after the Ladakh clashes, India requested China to reactivate this mechanism, and India's NSA and the Chinese State Counselor, they managed to at least maintain the status quo. Following this, the military commander level talks were initiated, and over the last 4 years, several rounds of talks have been held between senior military commanders. Through these talks, we managed to resolve the tensions at few locations, such as Panongso Lake, Galwan River Valley, and Hot Springs. So these flashpoints were resolved, and both sides carried out a disengagement and de-escalation, and they pulled back the troops as well. But however, the issue continued to remain. The standoff continued at Depsang Plains and Demchok. So these two flashpoints remained unresolved. So to avoid further escalation, both India and China had agreed to create a buffer point beyond which patrolling was not allowed by both the sides, so that the face-off can be avoided between Indian and Chinese troops. A buffer zone had been created at Depsang Plain and Demchok, which was essentially preventing the patrolling from both the sides. So now, India-China have resolved this. They have agreed to get rid of the buffer points and restore the normal patrolling which existed before 2020 at Demchok and Depsang Plain. So it doesn't mean we have fully resolved the Ladakh tensions. We have resolved the tensions only at Panongso Lake at the north and south bank, Galwan River Valley and Hot Springs. Depsang Plain and Demchok, the standoff continues in some way, but at least they've agreed to end the buffer zone which was created and allow the normal patrolling which was being done before 2020. Now this has set the stage, according to India's foreign minister, for an eventual de-induction of Chinese troops and a demobilization of Chinese troops. Because China, as I told you, had amassed thousands of troops with heavy military equipment near the flashpoint. So India's insistence is that we can't settle just for disengagement and de-escalation, but we also need the troops to be removed, the troops to be taken out and status quo to be restored and normal patrolling to be allowed. So as of now, both sides have agreed to restore normal patrolling, which is a big improvement. And this sets the stage for possible demobilization of troops from the region. And if both sides were to pull out the troops, it will bring down the tensions further and create a positive environment for the relationship. So this is something that we predicted in our analysis from many weeks. A few weeks ago, when National Security Advisor Ajit Doval met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Russia, right? We told you that there might be a possible breakthrough, a big development very soon before the BRICS summit. And as we predicted exactly, right before the BRICS summit, India has announced a possible improvement where patrolling will be restored back to the pre-2020 days. And most likely India-China might continue the engagement and they might even try to demobilize the troops from the region. So this improvement is very, very positive news for our economy as well. India has a lot of economic dependency on Chinese imports. China also looks at India as a lucrative market, as a good investment destination. So restoration of normal economic ties could also be helpful, because when Ladakh clashes broke out, India had restricted economic activity with China. We banned a few imports. We banned several Chinese mobile applications on security grounds. And Chinese investments were also restricted. So there are signs that India-China might restore a normal economic relationship, because if you look at this year's economic survey, the economic survey has recommended the normalization of the economic ties by resolving the Ladakh crisis as soon as possible. So since then, we have been getting indication from both governments that they are trying to resolve this and focus on their economic ties. So this could be a positive development. So let's see what happens further. It's still a developing story, because even though India has made the announcement, China has not acknowledged this development. When reporters asked the Chinese side whether such an agreement was worked out regarding patrolling at Depsang Plain and Demchok, the Chinese side has been silent. We haven't got any confirmation from them. So maybe the BRICS summit will give answers. That's why I said the meeting between PM Modi and Xi Jinping could be very important. So maybe there could be a big announcement from the two leaders where they might agree to completely de-escalate and demobilize and focus on their economic and diplomatic relations. So let's see how this will progress further, and we'll continue to track this story. Now, please take up a practice question based on this. The easing of tensions between India-China along the flashpoints in Ladakh creates an opportunity for restoring normalcy in the relationship. Evaluate. So for this question, you can start out the answer by giving the background about the latest Ladakh clashes that began from 2020 and point out how it disrupted the relationship. Because the question here is focused on these clashes and the impact it had on India-China relations, especially the economic diplomatic relations. So a good introduction would be to give a slight background about the Ladakh crisis that started from 2020 and how it disrupted our economic and diplomatic relations. Then in the body, you can also discuss a bit of the background regarding the boundary agreements. how the boundary agreements had helped in maintaining peace and status quo, and how we have relied on the same boundary agreements to achieve disengagement and de-escalation at 3 locations: at Panong So, Galwan River Valley and Hot Springs. And you can point out that recently there has been a big breakthrough before the BRICS summit to allow patrolling at Demchok and Depsang Plain, and this might set the stage for even complete de-induction, demobilization of troops across the line of actual control. So once you discuss the recent events, you can talk about its implications in the last part of the body, or maybe in the conclusion, right? You can bring out the implications, how it can have a positive impact on the diplomatic ties, on the economic relations especially, shed some light on India-China economic relations, and then conclude your answer. You can conclude by stating that the world is large enough to accommodate both India and China. The rise of India-China need not be a result, it need not result in hostility between the two Asian powers. We can learn to live side by side. We can cooperate, we can work with each other. And where we have a dispute, we can also learn how to handle those disputes without allowing them to escalate into a bigger conflict. So try to end on this note, slightly optimistic note, but at the same time, India should be cautious about China's aggressive expansionist behavior, because this is an established trait of the PRC. So you need to bring out a balanced view in your conclusion. You need to note that India-China should continue to live side by side. They should learn how to live side by side. The world is large enough to accommodate their aspirations. They need not be hostile to each other, right? You can even say China need not perceive India as an enemy, as India has an independent foreign policy. India never aligns with any particular power bloc. We don't believe in containing and targeting a single country. At the same time, you should strike a note of caution that PRC has consistently shown expansionist aggressive behavior. We can see that in South China Sea, across the Indo-Pacific, right? So it's important for India to be cautious, but we should utilize every opportunity to normalize the relationship. So a conclusion like this will be more balanced and will do justice to the given question. Now let's look at the next article, a very important article. Recently, the European Union has passed a law, the Nature Restoration Law, which focuses on restoring ecosystems. So the writer examines this law of the European Union and its impact on restoring our degraded ecosystems, and how India can draw a lesson from the EU. So this article gives us a great opportunity to understand the nature restoration law of the EU, which can be important both for prelims and mains. There can be a factual question on nature restoration law of the European Union, a mains question asking you about the provisions of nature restoration law of the EU. And how does this influence India? What lessons can India draw from this? The writer is saying that India should treat this as a model law and try to incorporate a similar law to protect our ecosystems, which are facing severe degradation. India's ecosystems are under severe stress, as you know. So the writer says India should draw lessons from the EU. We should learn from the the nature restoration law of the EU and adopt a similar law in our country, which could suit the Indian context to protect Indian ecosystems. So let's dive a little deep into this article, and I would like to go beyond the article as well, so that we have a comprehensive discussion on this. So first, let's talk about the Nature Restoration Law of European Union. It was adopted by the European Union Environmental Council in June 2024. Just a few months ago, the Environmental Council of the EU, which is responsible for environment and biodiversity protection in the EU member states, brought out this law, which was supported by majority of the EU member states. This law essentially sets a target. It sets a legally binding target. Please make a note of this. It has set a legally binding target for the European Union and its member states to restore 20% of the land and seas of Europe. and the deadline is 2030. The goal is to restore to at least 20% of terrestrial ecosystems and 20% of marine ecosystems by the end of this decade. This is the first primary goal, which is a legally binding target. This law also has a second target. The second target is to restore all ecosystems that need conservation, to restore all the degraded ecosystems by the middle of the century, by 2050. By then, the EU is also supposed to achieve net zero emissions. So in line with its climate commitments, the EU has taken up few environmental biodiversity commitments as well. So by the middle of the century, the EU is planning to restore all the degraded ecosystems. But initial target is to restore 20% of terrestrial and marine ecosystems by 2030. So this law is part of the EU's biodiversity strategy for 2030 and the European Green Deal. As part of these agreements, the EU has brought out this law to protect the degraded land and ecosystems. Now, what lessons does this offer for India? See, India also suffers from severe land and ecosystem degradation. In fact, ISRO has brought out the Desertification and Land Degradation Atlas of India. By using satellite mapping, ISRO has estimated the extent of India's geographical area which is undergoing desertification and land degradation, especially droughts and aridness, and in general destruction of ecosystems can lead to degradation of land, and land that degrades will lose its productivity. Eventually, the land becomes vulnerable to erosion, to the elements of nature like water, wind, etc. And this results in the land turning infertile, barren, turning into ravines, and eventually turning into deserts. So India is facing a serious challenge with regard to expansion of desert area. And ISRO's atlas indicates this very clearly. According to the Desertification and Land Degradation Atlas of ISRO, nearly 30% of our geographical area is undergoing land degradation and desertification. 29.7%, that is close to 30% of our land area is undergoing severe degradation and desertification. Now, this is an alarming number. If we don't restore these ecosystems and arrest desertification and land degradation, you might see a situation where more than half of the geographical area will fall under this category. So this will severely hit agricultural production. This could affect the economy, it could affect the society as well. So this has very serious consequences. And especially as we deal with the impact of global warming, climate change, as we experience more extreme weather, especially more droughts, heat waves, and forest fires, this situation will become even more alarming for India. So that is why it is important to counter land degradation and desertification by restoring and protecting our ecosystems. According to the atlas brought out by ISRO, there are few states which are more vulnerable, such as Gujarat, Maharashtra, interior parts of Karnataka, and the desert areas of Rajasthan. These arid, semi-arid regions of the country, they account for nearly 24% of the desertified land area of the country. Even the other states like Madhya Pradesh, the Bundelkhand region of UP, parts of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, parts of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, the Rayalaseema belt, all these areas are also undergoing severe land degradation and desertification. Even few parts of West Bengal and Bihar, few parts of Tamil Nadu as well. So this is a very serious concern, as this could affect agriculture, the farmers, and the economy, and eventually it could have a devastating impact. Currently, India does have many schemes and initiatives to deal with ecosystem restoration, especially to counter desertification and land degradation. For example, we have the Green India Mission that focuses on afforestation measures, agroforestry measures. We also have the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, which focuses on promoting irrigation in arid, semi-arid regions as well. The Integrated Watershed Management Program to deal with droughts. Both Krishi Sinchai Yojana and Integrated Watershed Management Program, they play a very important role in conserving water, in ensuring adequate water supply, especially to arid, semi-arid regions. to counter the impact of droughts. And we also have the National Afforestation Program. So we have sufficient schemes and programs, but what we need is a set of legally binding targets so that the government is accountable, so that the government is pushed to enforce and implement these schemes and initiatives to protect our ecosystems. The writer strongly believes it is an achievable target for India as well if we have a law similar to the European Union. So according to the writer, India should also adopt a law based on the nature restoration law of the EU. We can also set a target, maybe around 20 to 30% of our land and sea area, which is undergoing severe degradation, could be prioritized for immediate restoration. We can identify certain ecosystems, be it forests, wetlands, rivers, agricultural lands, and as well as urban green spaces, and provide for conservation and restoration efforts. We should prioritize the forests in Western Ghats in Northeast India at the foothills of Himalayas, and also in the Dandakaranya Eastern Ghats region. With regard to wetlands, we can look at critical ecosystems like Sundarbans, the Chilka Lake, which are rich with biodiversity, but they are facing a serious threat because of global warming and pollution, and as well as the loss of habitat, which is a threat to the species that thrive in these ecosystems. We should also focus on restoring our river ecosystems, our riverine ecosystems, from Ganga to the Brahmaputra to the peninsular rivers. They're all threatened by water pollution, very poor management of the wastewater, the effluents. So that should be a focus, a priority. Then restoring agricultural land, protecting agricultural land from degradation and desertification. This will have the single most impact, the biggest impact as far as the outcomes of such a program is concerned. And finally, urban areas. If you can promote urban forestry, community forests and parks and green spaces, this will help tackle the effect of urban heat islands. Most of our cities are affected due to heat waves and urban heat islands. So this could provide a solution. It can help in moderating, regulating temperatures during summer months in our cities. Then restoring agricultural land can be taken up through agroforestry, which will also bring commercial benefit to the farmers. It will create an additional source of income to the farmers as well, thus supporting their livelihood. So all these initiatives can be pushed if we have a law similar to the European Union with a legally binding target. See, right now we have sufficient schemes and initiatives. The thing is, we don't have a target. We don't have a law that mandates the achievement of the target. So that is what the writer is urging. Now, what will be the outcome of this? What can India gain by bringing out such a law? Because if at all there is a question based on this topic, a mains question, UPSC might ask you, how can this benefit India? Should India restore its ecosystem similar to European Union? Should we have a law similar to the EU? And what could be the possible outcomes? The biggest outcome would be the socio-economic outcome. The World Economic Forum had estimated that if the entire world focuses on ecosystem restoration and restores nature and biodiversity, this can bring economic benefits to the tune of $10 trillion every single year. By the end of the decade, if the world focuses on the global biodiversity framework, which is part of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which I mentioned yesterday as well. Under the Global Biodiversity Framework, also called the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, which was brought out in 2022 under the CBD Convention, countries have declared a 30 by 30 target. Countries have declared a target to restore 30% of land area, 30% of marine ecosystems by 2030. And also the reason why I'm mentioning this is because currently the Conference of Parties to CBD is taking place in Cali, Colombia. As we speak, Colombia is hosting this year's Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, where countries are reviewing their progress towards achieving the 30 by 30 target laid down under Global Biodiversity Framework. In fact, in today's newspaper, in the supplement page, we have an article referring to the Conference of Parties, which is underway at Cali in Colombia. So countries are coming together through the CBD Convention and trying to work under the Kunming-Montreal Protocol to try and achieve the 30 by 30 target. So if countries can adopt laws based on this, set a target of 20-30% restoration of their degraded ecosystems, that would be a significant achievement. And if by 2050, if all countries can restore at least half of all the degraded ecosystems, or if all the degraded ecosystems, this could bring tremendous economic and social benefits. It could help the farmers because countering degradation and desertification will boost agricultural productivity. It will make farming more resilient to the impact of droughts. So improved agricultural productivity is a boon for rural economy. It will benefit the farmers and it will help us mitigate the impact of climate change, because agriculture is a climate sensitive sector. Right? Extreme weather events are already impacting agricultural productivity and food security. So these problems can be tackled with economic benefits to farmers and the rural community. This can improve water security, not just for irrigation, but for drinking purposes, industrial purposes. As we deal with water shortages during the summer months, restoration of ecosystems like wetlands can ensure we have sufficient water. It can help in recharging the groundwater table. It can also create millions and millions of jobs. As we focus on these programs, right? It can boost the economy as well, creating several jobs directly or indirectly. And it will help India achieve Sustainable Development Goal number 15, which focuses on sustainable management of forests and combating desertification. So that is why there is a need for a law in India as well, similar to the Nature Restoration Law of European Union. This can have a lot of social benefits because many communities are dependent on the ecosystems present around them. For example, in coastal belt of India, the coastal communities are dependent on the mangrove ecosystems and mangrove wetlands. That is a source of their livelihood. So this could bring social transformation, social benefits to the communities as well. There are forest dwelling tribes that are dependent on the forests. So restoring the ecosystem will benefit those tribal and forest dwelling communities as they depend on minor forest produce. So there can be major impact on our climate goals as well. India has a very ambitious commitment under Paris Agreement to reduce emissions and to reduce emissions intensity, to adopt clean energy. So restoring the ecosystems will help in creating a massive carbon sink, because all these ecosystems have tremendous potential for carbon sequestration, be it forests, be it wetlands, be it the green spaces we create in rural and urban areas. This can help in absorbing more carbon, thus helping us achieve our net zero target by 2070. Right? So it can put us on the right path to achieve our climate targets as well and bring a lot of socio-economic benefits. That is why India should also focus on restoring the degraded ecosystems. So this is what we learn from this important article. So let's see what kind of question can be asked. The EU's Nature Restoration Law offers a model for ecosystem restoration in India. Discuss in detail. See, that's why I've taken a little extra time to discuss this topic, along with giving some additional points, so that you have all the required information to write an answer to such a question, where you can discuss this in detail, not only explain the provisions of the EU's Nature Restoration Law, but also explain why it's a model law for India, how India can benefit from this, how it can help meet the global targets as well. So that is the explanation you need to provide. So let's see how many of you can write an answer to this question. Now coming to the next article, on page 8, we have another interesting column related to US sanctions on Russia and why India has been accused of laundering Russian oil. So this brings up the topic of shadow ships or shadow fleets, which allegedly have been used by India to source Russian oil by bypassing the American Western sanctions, which has immensely benefited India. So this article helps us understand what are shadow fleets, how these sanctions are implemented and enforced by US, why ships are critical to bypass the sanctions, and why you should understand the registration of ship, how ships are managed, how ships are owned, how this plays a role with regard to sanctions and bypassing sanctions. That is what we need to learn. It's a very complex topic, but I'll try to break it down for you. See, ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, and even prior to that, as Russia had annexed Crimea in 2014, since a decade, US has targeted Russia with sanctions. Especially after the complete invasion in 2022, as the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, Western governments with US have targeted the Russian economy, especially Russia's oil exports. So India, which followed an independent policy, right? We never follow unilateral sanctions in general. So except for some rare exceptions, India has always avoided bypassed unilateral sanctions targeting a country. For example, we have never followed sanctions on Myanmar. Many times we have avoided the sanctions on Iran as well. We have bypassed Western sanctions on Iran as well. But of course, that is one exception also, because a few years ago, India was forced by US to follow the Western sanctions on Iran. But that is a rare exception, as I was mentioning. But in the context of Russia, given that we share all-weather friendship, given that we have a strategic historical friendship, India decided to stand with Russia, bypass the Western sanctions, and India went on to capitalize this opportunity as well. Because now Russia was selling its oil at a discounted price. And as a importer of fossil fuels, India lapped up this opportunity. See, India doesn't have enough crude oil resources. Almost 85% of our crude oil is imported. And India started buying the cheaper Russian discounted oil in massive quantities. And very soon, Russia became our top oil supplier, even overtaking Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and other top suppliers. Now, India not only benefited directly because our import bill reduced, as we were buying discounted oil from Russia by bypassing the Western sanctions, this naturally reduced our import cost, which was beneficial for the Indian economy. But we also converted the Russian oil into various petrochemical products, as India has a very robust petrochemical industry. And we started exporting these byproducts back into European market. That's why European countries started labeling India as a laundromat country. They said India is laundering Russian oil on behalf of Russia. They argued, they criticized India that India is buying Russian oil, refining it, turning it into various products and re-exporting it back into Western market. Because European countries have always been dependent on Russian oil and gas and energy supplies. Because of the sanctions, West European countries had cut off all the energy trade, but they ended up buying the same products from India at a higher cost. This was immensely beneficial for the Indian economy. So India has been accused by the Western countries of being a laundromat, a country which launders Russian oil and benefits from it. So the reason why India faces this criticism is mainly because, in a way, India has been able to enable the Russian war, as the continued energy exports of Russia helps in funding the war efforts in Ukraine. But the point is, how did India manage to ship the oil to the country when stringent sanctions were in place? This is where you need to understand how sanctions work. This is where you need to understand the role of ships and shadow fleets in helping in bypassing sanctions. See, when a country like US imposes economic sanctions on a country like Russia, the US begins investigation on entities, organizations, and individuals who are trading with the target country. It begins a global investigation and it figures out which are the major entities and organizations trading with the target country. And after determining this, any known assets, bank accounts related to these entities and organizations which are under Western control, they are frozen immediately by the authorities. The US will work with its Western allies with whom it has leverage, and it will identify any bank accounts, financial assets of these entities and companies and organizations which are present in the Western world, or where Western banks and financial institutions can exercise control. For example, let's say Indian Oil Corporation is importing from Russia, right? IOC might have foreign assets in Europe, in US. So if these countries want to target the company, they might freeze the accounts and the assets of this company, which is present in the Western world. So this is how the action is taken. So for this purpose, the US and its Western allies try to identify the shipping companies as well, which are enabling the export of these banned products. Right? The US set a limit. It didn't really ban the export of Russian oil because that would have destabilized the global oil markets. So instead of banning the Russian oil in the markets, what US did was they placed a cap of $60 per barrel, which is much lower than the market price. Market price is somewhere around $75 to $80. So that way Russia doesn't make a profit. The American idea was to maintain stability in the oil market, ensure there is sufficient oil supply so that it doesn't disrupt the global economy while cutting Russian profit margin. So the restriction they placed was if there is any company buying Russian oil at more than $60, they will be sanctioned. If there is any ship company shipping Russian oil and selling it at more than $60, they will be sanctioned. So buying Russian oil below $60 was allowed. And if any company goes above this rate, they will be sanctioned. So US authorities obviously started figuring out which ships are carrying out this export. But despite the best efforts of Western governments, they were not able to prevent the ships of India, Turkey, or even China from continuing the trade at even slightly higher prices as well, more than the cap, the limit which was placed. So how did India manage to do this? How did Turkey, China manage to evade Western sanctions? How did these companies, the shipping companies especially, how did they manage to avoid the action of US authorities? Because their assets and accounts could have been frozen. Because any major global shipping company will have global assets and accounts in many other countries. But these companies never face the impact because there are ways in the shipping industry to avoid the impact of sanctions. So this is where you should understand how ships are registered, what flags do they carry, what are the regulations surrounding shipping, and how ships avoid these regulations and sanctions and geopolitical tensions. So let's take a quick look. See, I'm sure you might know that ships often carry a flag of a certain country. We say that this ship is carrying the Indian flag, this ship is carrying the Bangladeshi flag, or it's carrying the flag of Panama, Liberia. So ships carry a certain flag. So just because they are carrying a certain flag doesn't mean the ship is registered in that country or owned in that country. The owner of the ship might be from some other country. Let's say, for example, the owner of the ship is a Greek company because Greece is the world leader when it comes to merchant shipping. Greece has the highest ownership of merchant ships. I'll give you the data, I'll come to that point. So let's assume just for a second here that a Greek company based out of Greece owns a fleet of ships, right? They have the ownership, but the flag these ships will carry will be of a different country. This is called flag of convenience. Whichever country offers the most convenient regulations, the ship will bear the flag of that country, and the owner will keep changing the flag depending on the benefits. There are few territories like Panama, Liberia, that provide tax benefits, almost tax-free benefits for ships if they carry the flag of these countries. So many ships shift to the flag of Panama, Liberia. Even Cyprus, for example. So ships might be owned by a company in some other country, but they might be carrying the flag of some other country. Usually the flags are for convenience. Countries with relaxed scrutiny, countries with relaxed regulations, they are preferred by ship owners to carry the flag, to bear the flag. Countries like Eswatini, for example. Eswatini is not even a member of International Maritime Organization. It doesn't follow the global standards laid out by the IMO, International Maritime Organization. So such countries are preferred by ship owners. The ship might be owned by someone in Japan or China or Greece or in any other part of the world, but they bear a different flag of a different country depending on the convenience factor. If the regulations are relaxed, taxes are low, if the overall charges, the insurance cost is low, they will prefer the flag of those countries. Now it's not just this. The ship is owned by someone, the flag is of another country. Eventually, the ship might be managed and operated by someone else in some other country. The operation and management is done by some other company based out of some other country. Look at how complicated this is. So ownership and management of ship is not easy and simple. So there is a different owner from different country, bearing a different flag for convenience, operated and managed by some other company in some other country. And this structure keeps changing every now and then. Depending on global developments, the ship owners will try to protect their interests, maximize their profits. They'll keep changing the flag. They will keep changing the management company as well, which is operating and managing the ship. So by doing this, they can evade the sanctions. They can avoid the taint attached with the country which has been sanctioned. These ships can go to Russia, buy the oil and export it to some other country and still avoid the sanctions because they will keep changing the flag they are bearing or the company which is managing them. Now, if you look at insurance for ships and all the other related expenses, this is primarily centered around UK and Europe. UK and Europe primarily control the insurance market, what is called the P&I market. The entire insurance market for ships, because this is a massive industry. Ships can't head out without insurance and it is very expensive. The premium for ship insurance is very expensive. So UK, being a financial hub, controls the entire insurance segment. So this is where US has leverage. US can definitely work with UK, which is an ally with other Western European countries, to target ship insurance. But US becomes ineffective because of the different flags that are carried by the ships and the constant change in management and ownership. So such ships which deliberately adopt evasive tactics, they are referred to by the Western countries as a shadow fleet. As if it's like a pirate fleet engaging in illegal activity. That is how they treat it. They treat them as shadow fleets. And US and European countries have accused India as well of running a large shadow fleet. Many Indian companies have been accused of running shadow fleets in order to ensure we avoid the Western sanctions by constantly changing the flag and by changing the management which operates the ship. Eventually, ownership remains the same, but the flag and the management keeps changing, which helps in avoiding the actual route and the actual purpose of the ship. Thus, it can evade the sanctions. So for insurance, there are alternatives. There are other places where insurance can be procured. So countries have started looking at these other alternatives. Now, for example, if you look at the global shipping industry, as I told you, Greeks own most of the ships in the world. Almost 20% of merchant ships are owned by Greek companies. Second comes China. Please remember this fact. It can be important for prelims. The country which owns the maximum number of merchant ships in the world is Greece. Second is China. It recently overtook Japan. So Japan is third. Then coming to shipbuilding, which countries build and repair the most number of ships? It is China, followed by Japan and South Korea. This is with regard to shipbuilding and repair of ships. With regard to insurance, finance and other related costs, it is UK and Europe. So this is a basic knowledge that you should have for answering any prelims question. So ships are using these tactics to evade the possibility of detection and avoid the impact of sanctions. So in short, the US will find it very, very difficult to enforce its own sanctions because there are many ways and routes through which you can evade the sanctions. Through shadow fleets and by changing the flag and changing the management and operations regularly, you can ensure that you can skip the American enforcement of these sanctions. For example, a number of ships headed to India owned by Indian companies, they carried out a big change in their registration. They all shifted base to Dubai. There are many Indian-owned Dubai-based shipping companies. They made use of the easier, relaxed regulations in Dubai. And also don't forget, UAE is a good friend of Russia. So Indian shipping companies, which own big fleets of ships, which are involved in bringing Russian oil, they shifted the registration to either Dubai or to the Indian Registry Society itself. Many new registrations happened where new flags were issued, new registrations were issued to many ships. So by switching the registration, by bringing it under different jurisdictions, they are able to avoid the investigation of the Western authorities. They are able to even manipulate the route or hide the actual ports they are visiting, the cargo they are carrying. They can turn off the transponders and manipulate the data as well, right? To show that they headed to some other country, brought some other cargo, while in reality they would have gone to Russia and brought Russian oil. So through various such deceptive tactics, ships are avoiding the Western sanctions, and this is very common. It's not just India, many other countries do it. Turkey, China, many others do it. In fact, when Iran was sanctioned, right, the same tactic was used. Many companies, they shifted registration to South Korea, to a South Korean registry, so that US will not suspect those ships, because South Korea is an American ally. So US did not suspect these vessels initially, and for many months, these vessels which were carrying Iranian oil, they avoided American sanctions. So this is what we call as a shadow fleet. So coming to my final point, eventually these sanctions may not be very effective. When sanctions are imposed by few countries, a select group of countries, if they're targeting one specific country, usually these sanctions are not very effective. Of course, it will have some impact. Several Russian companies have taken a big hit because their assets and accounts have been frozen. So there has been some economic impact, but it may not cripple the country. Right? There are different ways of avoiding the sanctions, and such methods of shipping where shadow fleets are used, flags are changed, management and ownership is changed regularly. This is one of the tactics to avoid the impact of sanctions. And also don't forget, even Western governments are not entirely serious about imposing the sanctions very strictly, because they know this could disrupt the global economy. So they have held back as well to an extent, and they have frozen the accounts and assets of some companies, especially Russian companies. But when it comes to other countries, like companies of India, China and others, they haven't really targeted them as much because they don't want to disrupt the global economy as well. And also it's very difficult and challenging given the complexity involved in a globalized world. A globalized economy is a very complex economy, right? There are many shell companies, fake companies giving cover for various business operations. So it's almost impossible or even a nightmare to even identify who are the actual owners of the companies, which country owns them. So given the complexity, it becomes challenging as well. Plus, US doesn't want to cripple the global economy. Eventually, even American interests will be hurt. So only few Russian companies have been seriously targeted, especially the companies close to Putin, companies and organizations owned by Russian officials, the accounts belonging to Russian officials, they have been sanctioned, whereas other companies have been largely spared. So that shows the ineffectiveness of these sanctions as well. Now let's take a quick look at the next article. On page number 6, we have an editorial related to the ongoing protests in Ladakh. As you know, the people of Ladakh have been protesting for many months under the leadership of popular teacher and activist Sonam Wangchuk. Ladakh is protesting for 6th schedule autonomy under the Indian Constitution. The main demand is constitutional autonomy under the 6th schedule, which has been given to a few tribal areas in northeast India. The 6th schedule primarily applies for the tribal belt of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. In these northeastern states, we have a total of 10 autonomous district councils, where tribal communities have been granted constitutional autonomy. For example, in the Karbi Anglong region for the Karbi community, in the Dimasa region for Dimasa community. Like this, for 10 regions in these 4 northeastern states, autonomous district councils have been created that provides constitutional autonomy. So these autonomous councils will have their own local elections, and only the members of the particular tribe are eligible to contest, and a lot of powers are devolved to the local autonomous council. A few legislative powers, administrative, executive powers, and even some judicial powers are delegated to these councils, thus restricting the authority of the central and the state governments. So in these subjects, autonomous councils will enjoy more autonomy. They can levy some local taxes, raise finances, implement their own welfare schemes and programs, protect the land, protect the tribal culture and customs, etc. So a similar status is being demanded in Ladakh. Now the question is why? This is related to the long-standing demand of people of Ladakh with regard to their sensitive environment and their livelihood. See, for many decades, Ladakh was very much a part of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. When Ladakh was part of J&K, the state of J&K, the people of Ladakh, especially in Leh, they had one complaint, that only issues related to Kashmir and Jammu are dominant, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir benefit, but people of Ladakh are getting left behind. People of Ladakh felt they were neglected when they were part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, especially in the Leh region. The Leh region is largely Buddhist dominated. Whereas if you look at the other part of Ladakh, which is Kargil, it is largely Muslim dominated. So initially the Buddhist community in Leh especially, and even the Muslim community in Kargil, they had their own reasons to have complaints about being part of the larger state of Jammu and Kashmir. So in 2019, when the special status of J&K was revoked under Article 370 and J&K was reorganized into two union territories, Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and Union Territory of Ladakh, the people of Ladakh had welcomed these changes. The people of Ladakh were very happy with the changes, that the state had been reorganized and Ladakh was made into a union territory. They believed this will give them more autonomy. But now the very same people are opposing the changes that happened, and they are demanding autonomy from the center. Because as a union territory without a legislature, Ladakh has come under the direct administration of the center. Whereas Jammu and Kashmir, as you know, is a union territory with a legislature. Recently elections were held as well. Right? So it's quite similar to Delhi, Puducherry in that regard. So Jammu and Kashmir at least has an elected legislative assembly so that the people's aspirations, the developmental needs of people can be addressed. But Ladakh has no such representation. Ladakh right now has very limited representation in the parliament as a small union territory, and it is directly governed, administered by the center, thus restricting the space available for local issues. People of Ladakh have certain genuine concerns and demands. So editorial is saying that the center is not listening to the people. The reason why people of Ladakh have such demands, right? When they were part of J&K, they wanted to break away from Jammu and Kashmir as well, right? They welcomed the changes when state was reorganized into two union territories. And now they're opposing those changes and they're demanding constitutional autonomy. In fact, some protesters are demanding statehood as well. There are few Ladakhi protesters demanding separate statehood, right? The point is why? The point is, why are they protesting? Why such demands are coming up? It's because the center has not heard the genuine concerns of people of Ladakh. The center is largely looking at Ladakh through the prism of China. We just discussed why China is interested in Ladakh, the line of actual control, the boundary dispute, the Aksai Chin area which has been occupied by China. So given the security implications and strategic implications, the center is more obsessed with securing Ladakh, protecting Ladakh. The center has militarized Ladakh. It has taken up such projects which serve a strategic purpose, like strategic roads, etc. But it has largely ignored or forgotten the developmental needs of the region. The people of Ladakh are faced with serious environmental challenges. The environment of Ladakh is very prone, vulnerable to the impact of disasters. Climate change is having a big impact. Water scarcity has become a concern. The region is prone to earthquakes, landslides, avalanches. And also the nomadic community and the semi-nomadic community in Ladakh, they are not able to access pastoral grounds because of the focus on security and the restrictions on movement. The nomadic, semi-nomadic communities of Ladakh are not able to access the pastoral grounds. the people also feel that there aren't enough employment opportunities. There isn't enough development happening at the ground level. So this is a genuine concern. See, in 1990s, to satisfy some of the demands, limited autonomy was given to Leh and Kargil. In Ladakh, there is a type of autonomy, a statutory autonomy. A parliamentary law was passed through which Leh and Kargil have their own autonomous councils, but with very limited autonomy, with very limited powers. Now they are demanding 6th schedule autonomy under the constitution with constitutional status. And the government has cracked down on the protesters. Instead of listening to them, hearing their complaints and their concerns and addressing them, the government has tried arresting the protesters, including Sonam Wangchuk. Right? The editorial says this approach is not correct. Yes, there are security concerns in Ladakh, especially with regard to the Chinese threat, but that doesn't mean we should ignore the developmental needs of the people. The editorial is saying if the government listens, if the government engages with the protesters in Ladakh, it will be able to understand the livelihood-related problems, development-related problems, environment-related problems, and solutions can be found to them. Right? The region can be made disaster resilient. We can promote climate resilient practices to make the region disaster proof and support the education, healthcare, and create opportunities, protect the environment. So all these initiatives can be taken up, and the center can even announce dedicated programs, a dedicated development package to satisfy the demands. And there is no harm in either granting constitutional autonomy or even statehood if required. So that is what the editorial is pointing out. But what is needed right now is for the center to listen, to talk to the protesters in Ladakh, which is currently not happening. So that is the viewpoint of the editorial. Now let's move on to the next article under the prelim section. Under the prelim section, on the front page itself, we have an article related to the concept of secularism and the rights of minority educational institutions. See, in Uttar Pradesh, a law had been passed to regulate madrasas, where religious education is provided. Madrasas, as you know, is a religious minority institution which enjoys constitutional protection under Article 30 of the Indian Constitution. So this law, passed by the UP Assembly, had been challenged at the Supreme Court on the grounds that it violates the principle of secularism. Because any state interference in the administration of minority institutions could constitute a violation of secularism. That is the argument the petitioners were making. But the Supreme Court has disagreed with the petitioners. The Supreme Court, a bench headed by the Chief Justice, D.Y. Chandrachud, has pointed out that a law to regulate some aspects of minority education institutions to improve the quality of education, to broad base the education being imparted to children in religious and linguistic minority institutions, does not constitute a violation of secularism. So Article 30 of the Indian Constitution guarantees a fundamental right to protect minority communities, be it religious minority or linguistic minorities. They have a constitutional right to set up and administer their educational institutions. This will help in protecting the minority religion, minority language of that particular community. States' interference in these institutions is restricted and limited through this fundamental right. But however, there are reasonable restrictions, right? No fundamental right is absolute. There are reasonable restrictions. So Supreme Court has said the state is well within its rights to restrict and regulate some activities in minority education institutions if the purpose is to improve the quality of education. If the purpose is to impart better education and broad base the knowledge of the students attending these institutions, be it a religious or linguistic minority institution, it is totally valid, it is constitutional, and it is not a violation of the principle of secularism, according to the Supreme Court. Next, we have another article related to the Constitution, the interpretation of the Constitution and observation made by the Supreme Court. This is related to the preamble and few specific words in the preamble. Words such as secular, socialist, and integrity. So the original preamble that was adopted in 1949 under the Indian Constitution did not contain these words. The preamble read that India shall be a sovereign democratic republic. This is how the preamble began. We, the people of India, solemnly swear to establish India as a sovereign democratic republic. But in 1976, when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had imposed an emergency in the country, which was the darkest hour of Indian democracy, where democracy had been wiped out. Under the emergency period, the Indira Gandhi government introduced one of the most controversial constitutional amendments, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, which is also referred to as a mini constitution, because this amendment carried out multiple changes to the constitution. The 42nd Constitutional Amendment introduced these words, secular, socialist, and integrity. So now the preamble read that India would be constituted as a sovereign, secular, democratic, socialist republic, and the word unity, which is also part of the preamble, was replaced with unity and integrity. So this has been challenged by Subramaniam Swamy with a petition at the Supreme Court. So Subramaniam Swamy has opposed these changes and he wants the Supreme Court to strike down these words and get them removed from the preamble. But the Supreme Court has disagreed. The Supreme Court has said that the word secular, even though it was added in 1976, the Indian Constitution has been inherently secular right from 1949-1950. If you look at other provisions of the preamble, for example, if you look at the words fraternity, if you look at the fundamental rights like Article 14 that guarantees right to equality, which promises no discrimination on the lines of religion, it clearly shows Indian Constitution was inherently secular, even though the word secular was not added. So Supreme Court of India has rejected this petition of Subramaniam Swamy, stating that the word secular should be a part of the preamble. Doesn't matter whether it was added during emergency period, through a constitutional amendment, through a controversial amendment, but inherently the Indian Constitution has remained secular. And to remove the word secular now would be against the basic structure of the Constitution. In fact, in the landmark Keshwanand Bharti case, the Supreme Court had pointed out that preamble is integral to the Constitution. It's an integral part of the Constitution. So Parliament can amend it. There's no doubt. Parliament can get these words removed. But however, those amendments cannot alter the basic structure. And secularism is part of the basic structure. So Supreme Court has struck down this petition. It has refused to entertain this petition, and it has stated that these words, they serve a very valid purpose. Of course, later, 44th Amendment and other constitutional amendments and Supreme Court rulings, they corrected some of the authoritarian tendencies introduced through the emergency period. But the point is, these words remain very relevant. They have a relevance even today. And it is seen as part of the basic structure, the word secular in particular. Subramaniam Swamy appealed that even the word socialist is against the ethos of the Indian Constitution. But the Supreme Court has denied this. The Supreme Court has said the word socialist provides for equality. It provides for treating everyone equal in the society. We can't simply go by the Western interpretation of socialism. Socialism has been adopted to the Indian context, right? And integrity helps in promoting the unity and integrity of the nation to keep the society, the communities together. So Supreme Court has struck down this petition by stating that secularism is very much part of the basic structure and the word cannot be removed now. Is that clear? So this is what we learned from today's newspaper. I hope you guys have understood all the articles. Do let me know what you think in the comments. And if you understood everything, and if you like the session, please press the like button. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow. Take care. Have a good day.